Queen Valara stood on her palace balcony, her tall blue form casting a long shadow across the crystal floor. The purple sky of her home world stretched before her, filled with floating cities and silver ships. But today, she only watched one small shuttle coming down through the clouds. Her heart beat fast inside her chest. The shuttle carried news about her daughter. Princess Lyrian had been missing for 12 long years. 12 years since her exploration ship had disappeared near the edge of their galaxy. 12 years of searching empty space and finding nothing. The Queen's hands gripped the crystal rail. Her skin glowed with a soft blue light, the way all Zephyrians glowed when they felt strong emotions. Behind her, the royal guard stood silent. They knew better than to speak when their queen was worried. The shuttle landed in the courtyard below with a soft hiss. Steam rose from its metal hull as the engines cooled down. Queen Valara watched as the door opened slowly. Her breath caught in her throat. A figure stepped out. Tall and blue like all Zephyrians, but wearing strange clothes. Not the flowing robes of royalty, but simple pants and a shirt like the working people wore. The figure looked up at the palace, and Queen Valara saw her daughter's face for the first time in 12 years. "Lyrian," the queen whispered. But something was wrong. Princess Lyrian was not alone. She held the hands of two small creatures, two human children. The queen had never seen human children before. They were tiny compared to Zephyrians, with soft pink skin and small round faces. The boy looked about 8 years old, with dark hair and brown eyes. The girl was younger, maybe 6, with light brown hair tied back with a simple ribbon. The children stayed close to Lyrian as they walked across the courtyard. They did not run or hide. Instead, they looked around with wide eyes at the tall crystal buildings and the purple sky. The boy pointed at something and said words in a language the queen did not know. Lyrian bent down and answered him in the same strange tongue. The royal court had gathered in the great hall. Hundreds of tall blue Zephyrians in their finest robes waited to see their lost princess return. But when the doors opened and Lyrian walked in with the two human children, the hall fell completely silent. The children's footsteps echoed on the crystal floor. They walked between rows of shocked nobles, still holding Lyrian's hands. The boy, Jake, looked straight ahead with courage that surprised the watching aliens. The girl, Amy, stayed close to her brother but smiled at some of the younger Zephyrians who stared at her. Queen Valara stepped down from her throne. Each step felt heavy as stone. When she reached her daughter, she stopped and looked into Lyrian's eyes. They were the same violet color she remembered, but something in them had changed. There was a warmth there that had not been there before. "My daughter," Queen Valara said in their ancient language. "You have returned to us." "Yes, mother," Lyrian replied. But then she did something that shocked everyone in the hall. She switched to the human language and spoke to the children. "Jake, Amy, this is my mother, the queen. Mother, these are my children." The word "children" hit the hall like thunder. Zephyrians did not adopt aliens. They did not call other species their family. It was not their way. The boy Jake stepped forward. He was so small that the queen had to bend down to see his face properly. In careful, slow words, he said, "Your Majesty, thank you for letting us come to your home." His accent was strange, but he spoke their language well enough to be understood. The queen stared at him. No human had ever learned their tongue before. Most aliens could not even make the right sounds. Amy was too shy to speak, but she gave a small bow the way Lyrian had taught her. Her human customs mixed with Zephyrian manners in a way that was both wrong and somehow right. "How?" Queen Valara asked her daughter. "How did this happen?" Lyrian's skin glowed brighter as she felt protective love for the children. "It is a long story, Mother. These children saved my life, and I saved theirs. We are family now." The royal council members looked at each other with worry. Lord Haxon, the oldest advisor, stepped forward. His blue skin was dark with age, and his eyes were cold. "Princess," he said in a voice like winter wind, "you have been gone too long. You have forgotten your duties. These creatures cannot be part of our royal house." Jake's small hand tightened around Lyrian's fingers. Amy moved closer to her brother. They did not understand all the words, but they knew the tone was not friendly. Lyrian's voice grew sharp. These children are not creatures. They are brave and smart and kind. They are my family. You are a princess of the Zephyrian Empire, Lord Haxon said. You cannot lower yourself to raising alien pets. The words hung in the air like poison. Queen Valara saw her daughter's face change. The gentle look was gone, replaced by royal anger. But before Lyrian could speak, something unexpected happened. Amy stepped forward. The tiny human girl looked up at the tall, scary alien lord and said in perfect Zephyrian, "We are not pets, we are people. And Lyrian is our mother." Her voice was small but clear. Every person in the great hall heard her words. A 6-year-old human child had just defended herself to one of the most powerful lords in the empire. Queen Valara looked down at the small girl with new eyes. There was something special about these humans, something that had changed her daughter from a cold princess into a warm mother. "We will talk more tomorrow," the queen announced. "Tonight, you rest. All of you." As the royal family left the great hall, the court began to whisper. Some voices were angry. Others were curious, but everyone agreed on one thing. Nothing would ever be the same again. That night, Queen Valara stood again on her balcony. Below in the guest quarters, she could see light from Lyrian's window. Inside, her daughter was probably reading bedtime stories to 2 human children, speaking in words from a distant world. The queen touched the crystal rail and wondered what stories those children would tell her about her missing daughter. What had happened in those 12 lost years? And why did seeing Lyrian with them make her feel like her daughter had finally come home? The next morning, Queen Valara called the royal council to meet in the small chamber. She wanted to hear her daughter's story before the whole court demanded answers. Lord Haxon sat at the long crystal table with 5 other advisors. All of them looked serious and worried. Lyrian entered the room alone. She had left Jake and Amy with the palace teachers, who were amazed to find that human children could learn so quickly. The princess wore simple clothes again, not royal robes. Her mother noticed she moved differently now, more carefully, like someone who had learned to watch for danger. "Tell us what happened," Queen Valara said softly. "Tell us where you have been." Lyrian sat down across from the council members. For a moment she looked like the young princess who had left 12 years ago. Then she began to speak, and her voice carried the weight of someone who had lived through terrible things. "My exploration ship was caught in a plasma storm near the outer rim," she said. "We tried to escape, but the storm was too strong. The ship broke apart. I was thrown into an escape pod, but it was damaged. I crashed on a small world called Haven's Edge." Lord Haxon leaned forward. "Why did you not signal for rescue?" "My communication equipment was destroyed. I was badly hurt and alone on an alien world." Lyrian's skin dimmed as she remembered the pain. "I should have died there." Queen Valara felt cold fear in her chest. "But you did not die." "No, because of the humans." Lyrian's face grew warm with memory. The crash happened near their settlement. It was a small place, maybe 300 people trying to build a new life on the frontier. They found me in the wreckage. The council members looked at each other. Humans helping a crashed alien was not something they expected to hear. "I was unconscious for days," Lyrian continued. "When I woke up, I was in their medical center. A human doctor named Kate Williams was taking care of me. She had cleaned my wounds and given me medicine to fight infection. Her husband, Ben, helped her. They worked day and night to save my life." "Did they know you were royalty?" asked Lady Nara, the youngest council member. "No. I looked like any other Zephyrian to them. But it did not matter. They helped me because I needed help. That was their way." Lyrian paused. "I learned later that they had lost their own children in an attack just weeks before. Raiders had come to steal supplies and food. Kate and Ben could have been bitter and angry. Instead, they chose to save a stranger. The room was quiet. Zephyrians understood honor and duty, but this was something different. I stayed to recover," Lyrian said. "But while I was healing, the raiders came back. This time with more ships and more weapons. The settlement had no real defenses, just farmers and doctors and teachers trying to live in peace." Lord Haxon frowned. "What did you do?" "At first, nothing. I was still weak and it was not my fight." Lyrian's voice grew quiet with shame. I thought like a princess then. I thought their problems were not my problems. Queen Valara understood. It was how she had raised her daughter. Royalty did not involve themselves in the troubles of lesser beings. But then I saw what the humans did. Lyrian continued. They fought back. Not with advanced weapons or superior technology. They fought with heart. Old farmers picked up hunting rifles to defend children who were not their own. Teachers turned their school into a fortress. Dr. Kate worked on wounded people even while explosions shook the building around her. Lyrian stood up and walked to the window. Outside, the Crystal City sparkled in the morning light. Everything was clean and perfect and safe. I watched a human named Ryan Clark run through enemy fire to save a little girl who was trapped. He did not know her name. She was not his family, but she was human, so she mattered to him. He died getting her to safety. The princess turned back to face the council. Her eyes were bright with unshed tears. That night, while the humans planned their defense, I made a choice. I used my knowledge of technology to help them build better weapons. I taught their fighters how to use energy shields. I showed their doctors how to treat plasma burns. You interfered in an alien conflict, Lord Haxon said with disapproval. Yes, and I am glad I did. Lyrian's voice grew strong, because the next day I met Jake and Amy. The mention of the children made everyone listen more carefully. The raiders attacked the medical center where I was staying. Jake was 3 years old then. Amy was only 1. Their parents were security guards for the settlement. When the raiders broke through the outer defenses, Jake's father, Mike Martinez, and Amy's mother, Linda Chen, were ordered to fall back to the inner shelters. Lyrian sat down again, her hands folded in her lap. They could have run. They could have saved themselves. Instead, they stayed to hold the line and give other families time to escape. They died buying precious minutes for people they barely knew. Queen Valara felt something tight in her chest. And the children? Ben Williams found them in the rubble, crying over their parents' bodies. He brought them to the medical center. Kate took them in without question, even though she and Ben had their own work to do. Lyrian smiled sadly. I helped care for them. I did not know anything about children, but they needed someone to hold them when they cried. They needed someone to tell them they were safe. The siege lasted 3 weeks, Lyrian continued. 3 weeks of constant fighting. The humans never gave up. When they ran out of bullets, they made more. When their walls were broken, they built new ones. When people were hurt, they carried them to safety and kept fighting. Lady Nara asked quietly, "What happened to the raiders?" They finally left. The humans had made the cost too high. A settlement of 300 farmers had fought off a raid force of 1,000 pirates, not because they were stronger or had better weapons, because they refused to quit. The council members sat in silence, thinking about what they had heard. After the fighting ended, I stayed to help rebuild, Lyrian said. I told myself it was because I was still too weak to travel. But that was a lie. I stayed because I had found something I had never known before. What? Queen Valara asked. Purpose. On our world, I was just another princess. My life was planned out from birth. Ceremonies and duties and marriages arranged for political gain. But on Haven's Edge, I was needed. Really needed. Not because of my title, but because of what I could do. Lyrian looked at each council member in turn. The children called me Aunt Lyri at first. Then just Lyri. Finally, when Amy was old enough to understand, she asked me why I never left. I told her it was because they were my family now. She smiled and said, Good. Families should stay together. You chose them over us, Lord Haxon said coldly. I chose love over duty, Lyrian replied. And I do not regret it. Queen Valara stood up slowly. She had listened to her daughter's story and understood something important. Lyrian had not been lost for 12 years. She had been found. That afternoon, Queen Valara walked through the palace gardens with her daughter. The crystal trees sang in the wind, making soft music that had comforted Zephyrian royalty for thousands of years. But today the queen found no peace in the familiar sounds. The council does not understand, she said to Lyrian. They think you have been corrupted by spending time with a primitive species. Lyrian stopped beside a fountain that flowed with liquid light. They are wrong, Mother. The humans are not primitive. They are something else entirely. What do you mean? Lyrian looked up at the purple sky where Zephyrian ships moved in perfect formation. Everything on their world was ordered and controlled. Beautiful but cold. Let me tell you about the years after the siege, she said. The years when I learned what humans really are. Queen Valara sat on a crystal bench and listened. The settlement was damaged badly, Lyrian began. Half the buildings were destroyed. The water system was broken. Crops were burned. Most species would have given up and moved somewhere else, but not humans. Lyrian sat beside her mother, her voice growing warm with memory. The morning after the last raider ship left, Ben Williams stood in the town square and made a speech. He was tired and hurt and covered in dust from the fighting. He said, "We are not leaving. This is our home. We will build it better than before." And they believed him? More than believed. They acted, Lyrian smiled. That same day, people began clearing rubble. Children too young to lift heavy stones carried water to the workers. Old people who could barely walk sat in the shade and mended torn clothes. Everyone did something. The Queen tried to imagine such a scene. On their world, rebuilding would be done by specialized crews with proper equipment and careful planning. It would take years. How long did it take them? She asked. 6 months for the basic repairs. 2 years to make it better than it was before. Lyrian's eyes shone, but that was not the amazing part. The amazing part was watching Jake and Amy grow up during those years. Queen Valara thought of the 2 small humans she had met yesterday. Tell me about them. Jake was 4 when the rebuilding started. He wanted to help with everything. Too small to carry big tools, so he learned to sort screws and bolts. Kate Williams taught him to read using equipment manuals so he could help find the right parts. By the time he was 6, he knew more about water systems than most adults. Lyrian stood and began walking again. The Queen followed. Amy was different. She watched everything and remembered it all. When she was 3, she started following Dr. Kate around the medical center. She learned to count by organizing medicine bottles. She learned colors by sorting bandages. By age 5, she could take blood pressure and wrap wounds. They sound intelligent, Queen Valara admitted. Intelligence was just the beginning, Lyrian said. What made them special was their hearts. They reached a part of the garden where rare flowers bloomed in impossible colors. The Queen remembered planting some of these with Lyrian when her daughter was young. I was there the day Jake decided to become a teacher, Lyrian continued. He was 7 years old. A new family had arrived at the settlement, refugees from another raider attack. Their little boy was scared and would not talk to anyone. Jake spent 3 days sitting with him, sharing his toys and food until the boy finally smiled. That sounds kind, but hardly remarkable. Lyrian shook her head. You do not understand. Jake did not just sit with him. He researched trauma in children using the settlement's computer system. He learned about different ways to help scared kids. Then he taught other children what he had learned so they could help too. Queen Valara felt surprised. A 7-year-old human had done research and taught others? That seemed advanced even for a young Zephyrian. Amy was the same way, Lyrian said. When she was 6, she noticed that some of the elderly humans were getting sick more often. She spent weeks observing their daily routines and taking notes. Finally, she figured out that they were not eating enough vegetables because the food was too hard for them to chew. What did she do? She convinced Dr. Kate to start a program making softer foods for older people. But Amy did not stop there. She organized the other children to visit the elderly every day and share meals with them. Sickness among the older humans dropped by half within a month. The Queen walked in silence for a while, thinking about what she had heard. These human children seemed remarkable, but she sensed there was more to the story. You speak of kindness and intelligence, she said finally. But what about strength? What about the courage needed to survive in a hostile galaxy? Lyrian's face grew serious. I was wondering when you would ask about that. They reached a small clearing where the afternoon light fell through crystal leaves in patterns of blue and gold. Lyrian sat on the grass and looked up at her mother. The test came when Jake was 8 and Amy was 6. Just 6 months ago, Queen Valara felt a chill of worry. What happened? The raiders came back. Different ones, but with the same goals. They wanted our food, our technology, and our people as slaves. Lyrian's skin began to glow with anger. This time they brought 3 ships and 500 fighters. They thought the settlement would be easy to take after so many years of peace. Were you ready for them? As ready as we could be. But we were still just farmers and doctors and teachers. The raiders were professional killers with military weapons. Lyrian pulled up a blade of crystal grass and watched it shimmer. The adults made plans to evacuate the children to hidden shelters while the fighters held them off. Queen Valara nodded. That sounded like a sensible strategy. Jake and Amy refused to go. The Queen blinked in surprise. They were just children. Yes, but they had spent years learning from the adults around them. Jake had studied the settlement's defense systems. Amy had memorized the medical procedures for treating battle wounds. They said they could help, and they were right. Lyrian stood up and faced her mother directly. When the attack began, Jake coordinated communications between the different defense teams. He stayed calm under fire and made sure everyone knew where the raiders were and what they were doing. Amy ran supplies to the fighters and treated wounded people in the field hospitals. That sounds dangerous for children so young. It was. But they did not run or hide or cry. They saw that their family needed them, and they chose to be brave. Lyrian's voice grew soft with pride. I watched Amy crawl through enemy fire to reach a wounded guard. She was so small that the raiders' shots went over her head. She dragged him to safety and stopped his bleeding while explosions shook the ground around them. Queen Valara felt something strange in her chest. Was it admiration for these tiny aliens? Jake did something even more incredible, Lyrian continued. When the raiders broke through our outer defenses, he volunteered to stay behind and operate the emergency protocols. That meant manually sealing blast doors to slow down the enemy advance. But that would trap him with the raiders. Yes, he knew that. He was 8 years old, and he chose to sacrifice himself to buy time for others to escape. Lyrian's eyes filled with tears. I found him at the control station, working frantically to lock down the systems before the raiders could reach him. When I asked him why he stayed, he said, "Someone has to protect our home." The Queen felt her breath catch. Such courage from one so young was extraordinary. What happened to him? I carried him out myself, fighting through 3 corridors of enemy soldiers to get him to safety. Lyrian smiled through her tears. He never stopped helping. Even while I was carrying him, he was calling out enemy positions and suggesting tactics. Queen Valara sat down heavily on a nearby stone. These were not the actions of a primitive species. These were the actions of heroes. The settlement won again, Lyrian concluded. Outnumbered and outgunned, but never outfought. The humans never give up, never surrender, never stop caring for each other. The Queen looked at her daughter with new understanding, and that is why you chose to stay with them. That is why I chose to become one of them, Lyrian corrected. They taught me that strength is not about power or technology. It is about choosing to do the right thing even when it costs you everything. Queen Valara stood up slowly. In the distance, she could hear children's laughter from the palace courtyards. Her grandchildren were playing with young Zephyrian nobles, sharing games from 2 different worlds. "You have changed, my daughter," she said quietly. "Yes," Lyrian agreed. "I hope I have changed for the better." As they walked back toward the palace, Queen Valara wondered if change might be coming for all of them. 3 days later, the Royal Council met in emergency session. Word of the human children had spread throughout the empire, and many nobles were angry. Lord Haxon stood before the assembled court, his blue skin dark with disapproval. "We cannot allow this to continue," he declared. "Princess Lyrian has forgotten her duty to our people. These alien creatures have no place in our royal house." Murmurs of agreement echoed through the great hall, but Queen Valara noticed that not everyone seemed convinced. Some of the younger nobles looked curious rather than angry. "What do you propose?" the Queen asked. "The princess must choose," Lord Haxon said firmly. "Her royal duties or these human pets. She cannot have both." Before Queen Valara could respond, Princess Lyrian stood up from her seat. She had been quiet during the debates, letting others argue about her future. Now her voice rang clear across the hall. "I will not abandon my children," she said. "They are part of my family now." "Then you are no fit to be our future queen," Lord Haxon replied coldly. Queen Valara had heard enough. She rose from her throne, and the hall fell silent. When she spoke, her voice carried the authority of centuries of rule. "There will be a test," she announced. "If these human children can prove they are worthy of our house, then they may stay. If they fail, Princess Lyrian must choose between her crown and her adopted family." Lord Haxon smiled with satisfaction. "What manner of test, Your Majesty?" "The same trials we give to young Zephyrian nobles," the Queen said. "Tests of intelligence, strategy, and courage. If they can pass these challenges, then we will know they truly belong among us." Lyrian felt fear grip her heart. The trials were designed for Zephyrian children with years of formal education and natural abilities that humans did not possess. Jake and Amy were smart and brave, But they were still just children from a frontier settlement. When will the tests begin? Lyrian asked. Tomorrow, Queen Valara replied. We will start with the challenge of numbers. That night, Lyrian sat with Jake and Amy in their guest quarters. She tried to explain what would happen, but the children seemed more excited than afraid. So we have to solve math problems? Jake asked, his eyes bright with interest. Not just math, Lyrian said carefully. Complex calculations that even adult Zephyrians find difficult. And if you fail any of the 3 tests, we will have to leave this place forever. Amy looked up from the book she was reading. It was a simple story about Zephyrian history, but she was already on the 3rd chapter. What are the other 2 tests? Strategy and courage, Lyrian replied. You will have to prove you can think like leaders and act like heroes. Jake and Amy looked at each other. They had faced raiders and helped rebuild their settlement. They had learned to solve problems and help their community. Maybe these tests would not be so different. The next morning, the royal court gathered in the Hall of Trials. It was an ancient room with crystal walls that showed complex mathematical equations floating in the air. Young Zephyrian nobles normally spent years preparing for these challenges. Jake walked into the room holding Amy's hand. They looked very small among the tall blue aliens watching them. Queen Valara sat on a smaller throne at the front of the room, with Lyrian standing nervously beside her. Master Kenton, the court's chief mathematician, stepped forward with a scroll of problems. He was old even by Zephyrian standards, and he had been testing noble children for over a century. The first challenge, he announced, requires solving 3 mathematical puzzles. You have 1 hour. He activated the crystal displays and numbers began flowing across the walls. The first problem involved calculating fuel efficiency for a space fleet. The second required determining crop yields for a colony world. The third was about resource distribution during an emergency. Lord Haxon leaned back in his chair with a satisfied expression. These problems required knowledge of advanced mathematics and space technology that no human child could possibly possess. But Jake surprised everyone. Instead of staring at the complex equations, he closed his eyes and thought about his life on Haven's Edge. Fuel efficiency was just like calculating how much water the settlement needed each day. Crop yields were similar to figuring out food supplies during the siege. Resource distribution was exactly what Amy had done when organizing care for elderly settlers. He opened his eyes and began to work. Amy watched her brother for a moment, then started on her own approach. She had learned to solve problems by breaking them into smaller pieces. Dr. Kate had taught her that complex medical procedures were just many simple steps done in the right order. The court watched in amazement as the 2 human children wrote solutions on crystal tablets. They did not use the traditional Zephyrian methods. Instead, they applied practical knowledge from their real-world experiences. Jake finished first. His fuel calculations were slightly different from the standard formula, but when Master Kenton checked them, they were actually more efficient than the expected answer. Amy's approach to resource distribution was completely original, but it would save both time and supplies. Impossible, Lord Haxon muttered. Interesting, Queen Valara said thoughtfully. The second test took place in the strategy chamber, where holographic battles played out on a massive display table. Commander Zara, the Empire's finest military tactician, presented the challenge. You must defend a colony from 3 different attack scenarios, she explained. Show us your battle plans. The first scenario showed raiders attacking a mining outpost. The second involved defending a trade route through asteroid fields. The third was a siege situation very much like what Jake and Amy had lived through. Amy stepped forward first. She studied the holographic display carefully, then began moving virtual ships and defensive units. Her plan for the mining outpost was simple but clever. Instead of fighting the raiders directly, she suggested evacuating the valuable equipment and collapsing the mine tunnels to deny the enemy their prize. Commander Zara frowned. That destroys the colony's economic value. But it saves the people, Amy replied. You can always build new mines. You cannot bring back dead miners. Jake took the second challenge. The asteroid field battle reminded him of games he used to play with other children, but with real consequences. He studied the enemy fleet patterns and noticed something the commanders had missed. The raiders are not trying to control the trade route, he said. They are herding our ships toward this asteroid cluster. There must be a trap waiting there. He was right. Hidden sensors revealed enemy ships lurking among the asteroids. Jake's alternative route would avoid the ambush entirely. For the final challenge, both children worked together. The siege scenario was almost exactly like their own experience. They coordinated defenses, planned supply distribution, and organized civilian evacuations with the confidence of veterans. How do they know so much about siege warfare? Commander Zara asked Lyrian quietly. Because they lived through it, Lyrian replied. The third and final test was courage. This had always been the most dangerous trial, where young Zephyrians faced simulated life-or-death situations to prove their bravery. General Vex led them to the Combat Training Center, where holographic environments could create any scenario. The test was simple. Face 3 dangerous situations and show that you would protect others even at risk to yourself. The first simulation placed them in a burning building with trapped civilians. The second was a spacecraft emergency with failing life support. The third was a direct combat situation against armed enemies. Jake and Amy entered each simulation together. In the burning building, Jake used his knowledge of structural engineering to find safe evacuation routes, while Amy provided first aid to injured people. They worked as a team, covering each other's weaknesses. During the spacecraft emergency, Amy took charge of medical triage while Jake managed the technical repairs. Neither of them panicked, even when the simulation made it seem like they might die. But it was the combat scenario that truly impressed the watching court. When faced with armed enemies threatening a group of civilians, both children immediately put themselves between the attackers and the innocent people. They used tactics and teamwork that soldiers twice their age would admire. They fight like they have done this before, General Vex observed. Because they have, Lyrian said proudly. When the tests were over, the court fell silent. Jake and Amy had not just passed the trials. They had excelled at them, showing abilities that impressed even the most experienced Zephyrian officials. Master Kenton stood first. In 40 years of testing noble children, I have never seen more creative problem-solving. Commander Zara nodded. Their strategic thinking is beyond their years. They understand warfare not from books, but from experience. General Vex crossed his arms. They have the courage of seasoned warriors and the hearts of protectors. I would be honored to serve beside them. Even Lord Haxon seemed shaken. These were not primitive alien creatures. They were remarkable individuals who had proven themselves worthy of respect. Queen Valara stood slowly. The tests are complete. Jake Martinez and Amy Chen have passed every challenge set before them. They have proven themselves worthy of our house. She looked directly at Lord Haxon. Do you still believe they are just pets? The old lord was quiet for a long moment. Finally, he bowed his head. I was wrong, Your Majesty. They are extraordinary. Lyrian felt tears. 6 months had passed since Jake and Amy became princes of the Zephyrian Empire. The news had spread across the galaxy like wildfire, shocking every alien species that heard it. The mighty Zephyrians, proud and ancient rulers of 1,000 worlds, had adopted human children into their royal family. Queen Valara stood in her private study, reading reports from across the empire. Some worlds were angry about the decision, others were curious, but all of them were watching to see what would happen next. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. Enter, she called. Princess Lyrian walked in, followed by Jake and Amy. The children had grown in the past months, not just taller but more confident. They wore modified Zephyrian robes that had been adjusted for their smaller size, and both carried data tablets like young scholars. Mother, we need to talk, Lyrian said seriously. Queen Valara gestured for them to sit. Jake and Amy climbed onto chairs that were too big for them, their feet swinging freely as they settled in. What troubles you? The Queen asked. Amy spoke first, her voice clear and determined. We have been studying the Empire's diplomatic records. There are problems that need fixing. Jake nodded and activated his tablet. Holographic displays filled the air around them, showing star maps and trade routes. The Krillian colonies have been asking for help with their food shortage for 3 years. The Vorthan mining worlds need medical supplies. The Nexus trade stations are having problems with pirates. Queen Valara looked at the displays with surprise. These were complex issues that her adult advisors had been debating for months. How do you know about these matters? We asked to see the reports, Amy said simply. Master Kenton has been teaching us about government and economics. We wanted to understand how the Empire works. Lyrian smiled proudly. They have been spending 12 hours a day in the Imperial Library, reading everything they can find. Jake manipulated the holographic display, highlighting specific problem areas. The Krillian food shortage could be fixed by sharing farming techniques from the human agricultural worlds. Humans know how to grow crops in difficult conditions because we have had to learn how to survive, Amy added. The Vorthan medical crisis is happening because they do not have enough doctors, but human medics could train their people quickly using simplified procedures that Dr. Kate taught us. Queen Valara leaned forward with interest. What about the pirate problem? Jake grinned, and for a moment he looked like the 8-year-old boy he still was. That one is easy. The pirates are using hit-and-run tactics because the trade stations fight alone, but if they coordinated their defenses like humans do, the pirates would not be able to succeed. The Queen stared at her grandchildren. In 6 months they had analyzed problems that had puzzled experienced diplomats and found practical solutions based on human experience. You want the Empire to adopt human methods, she said. Slowly. We want the Empire to learn from everyone, Amy corrected. Humans have good ideas about cooperation and innovation. Zephyrians have good ideas about organization and technology. Krillians are excellent engineers. Vortans are natural explorers. Every species has something valuable to offer. Lyrian spoke quietly. They are not just suggesting policy changes, Mother. They are proposing a new way of thinking about the Empire itself. Queen Valara understood. For thousands of years, the Zephyrians had ruled through strength and superiority. They had always seen themselves as the most advanced species, with other aliens as subjects to be managed. But her grandchildren were suggesting something radical, true partnership. The other noble houses will not accept such changes easily, she warned. Jake looked directly at his grandmother with eyes full of determination. Then we will prove that cooperation works better than domination. We will show them results. Over the following weeks, Queen Valara watched her grandchildren put their plans into action. With her permission, they began small pilot programs to test their ideas. The first success came from the Krillian food crisis. Amy organized a team of human agricultural specialists to work with Krillian farmers. Instead of simply providing food aid, they taught new farming techniques adapted to Krillian soil conditions. Within 2 months, crop yields increased by 40%. Jake tackled the Vorthan medical shortage by creating an exchange program. Human medics went to Vorthan worlds to provide emergency care while training local doctors. Vorthan mining engineers came to human worlds to improve extraction techniques. Both species benefited from the partnership. The pirate problem required more creativity. Jake and Amy worked with Admiral Torres, a human fleet commander, and General Vex to create the first multi-species defense force. Human tactics, Zephyrian technology, and Krillian engineering combined to build mobile defense platforms that could protect entire trade routes. When the pirates attacked the Nexus stations again, they faced coordinated resistance from 3 different species working as one unit. The raid was defeated so decisively that pirate attacks in that sector stopped completely. News of these successes reached every corner of the Empire. More importantly, it reached other governments throughout the galaxy. Ambassador Kree of the Antarian Republic requested a formal meeting with Queen Valara. The Antarians had been enemies of the Zephyrian Empire for over a century, fighting border wars and trade disputes that never seemed to end. Your Majesty, Ambassador Kree said during their meeting, we have been watching the changes in your empire with great interest. The cooperation between species is impressive. Queen Valara smiled. My grandchildren believe that former enemies can become future allies. Are you willing to test that theory? The negotiations were difficult. Centuries of mistrust could not be erased overnight. But Jake and Amy sat in on many of the discussions, asking innocent questions that somehow cut through complex diplomatic language to reach the heart of each issue. Why do the Antarians and Zephyrians fight over the Meridian system? Amy asked during one heated debate. Ambassador Kree and Lord Haxon both began explaining historical claims and territorial rights. Amy listened patiently, then asked another question. But what do both sides actually need from those worlds? It turned out that the Antarians needed rare minerals for their technology, while the Zephyrians wanted the system for its strategic location. Jake suggested a simple solution: joint mining operations with shared profits and mutual defense agreements. Children see solutions where adults see only problems. Ambassador Kree observed privately to Queen Valara. The first Antarian-Zephyrian cooperation treaty was signed 3 months later. It was a small agreement about trade and scientific exchange, but it marked the beginning of something larger. Other species took notice. The hegemony of rings sent observers to study Zephyrian integration policies. The Crystal Alliance proposed cultural exchange programs. Even the isolated void dwellers expressed interest in limited contact. 1 year after Jake and Amy had arrived on the Zephyrian homeworld, Queen Valara called a grand assembly. Representatives from dozens of species gathered in the Great Hall to witness something unprecedented. The official coronation of the first human princes in galactic history. Jake and Amy stood before the assembled delegates wearing specially made robes that combined elements from both human and Zephyrian traditions. They looked small but confident as Queen Valara placed ceremonial circlets on their heads. "Today we recognize not just these remarkable children," the Queen announced, "but the principle they represent. Strength comes not from dominance but from diversity. Wisdom comes not from isolation but from cooperation." Ambassador Kree stood up from his seat. The Antarian Republic formally recognizes Prince Jake and Princess Amy as legitimate heirs to the Zephyrian throne. One by one, other delegates rose to offer similar recognition. Species that had never shown respect to each other were united in acknowledging what these human children represented: hope for a better future. After the ceremony, Queen Valara found herself alone with Lyrian in the garden, where they had talked months before. The crystal trees sang in the wind, but now their music seemed warmer somehow. "Do you regret your choice?" the Queen asked her daughter. Lyrian watched Jake and Amy playing with young aliens from a dozen different worlds. They were teaching the others human games while learning alien customs in return. Laughter echoed across the gardens in voices that spoke different languages but shared the same joy. "No," Lyrian said softly. "I think this is what I was always meant to find." Queen Valara nodded. "The Empire is changing. Your children have shown us that our greatest strength was never our technology or our military might. It was our ability to grow and adapt in the distance." They could see Jake explaining the rules of a human ball game to a group of young Krillians who had never seen anything like it. Amy was bandaging the scraped knee of a Vorthan child who had fallen during play, using techniques she had learned from Dr. Kate years ago. "They are still so young," Queen Valara observed. "What will they accomplish when they grow up?" Lyrian smiled. "Whatever it is, they will not do it alone. They have taught all of us that the best achievements come from working together." As the sun set over the Crystal City, painting the sky in shades of purple and gold, the sound of children's laughter rose from the gardens. Human voices mixed with alien ones, creating a harmony that had never existed before. Queen Valara listened,